So in this video, we're going to discuss questions 24 through 27 in your packet, which are the beginning of the section on percentages. So 24 and 25, we're given statements or descriptions, and we're asked to write each as a percentage. So let's look at the first question. The statement is that in North America, 78 out of 100 people use the internet. So hopefully your mind immediately, since it's a math class, goes to the numerical portion of that statement. You see 78 out of 100, and you remember back to our ratio content and say that that can be expressed as a ratio with 78 in fraction form, I should say. The ratio of 78 to 100 becomes 78 in the numerator, 100 in the denominator. And then the nice thing about it is if you look back at what we were actually asked to do there, which was to write a percentage for each statement, remember that 78 out of 100, something out of 100 is actually the definition of a percent. So by definition, 78 out of 100 is 78%. So if you want kind of a simple way to look at it, whenever you have a fraction that has 100 in the denominator, that numerator is the actual percentage value because percentage means out of 100. For question 25, we're told that in a survey, 21 out of 50 students gave positive reviews. Again, our eye goes immediately to the 21 out of 50. A portion of that statement, which can be written as a ratio, 21 to 50, 21 in the numerator, 50 in the denominator. We say, well, why isn't this an easy problem like the one that we just did? Well, the main disadvantage that we're facing is that the original numerator, 50, isn't 100. We want it to be 100. Well, hopefully you look and you see that 50 can easily be made into 100 if you simply multiply by 2. But you can't just multiply the denominator of a fraction by 2, right? That would change the value. If you multiply the denominator by 2, you also need to multiply the numerator by 2. What we're doing is we're getting an equivalent fraction of 21 over 50 with the denominator of 100, and note that that equivalent fraction is 42 over 100, and by definition, again, any fraction where the denominator is 100, that numerator is just the percentage. So 21 out of 50 is equivalent to 42%. So when we get to problem 26, the problem statement changes slightly. Namely, we're given two percentages, and we're asked to change each to a simplified fraction. How are we going to do that? Well, it's going to rely heavily on the fact that percentage, again, means out of 100. So 7.4%, if I want to write that as a fraction, the first thing I want to do is remove the percent sign and then write that percentage, P, 7.4, as a fraction with that in the numerator divided by 100. Now, what's the problem with that as a fraction? Well, remember the definition of a fraction, you have to have whole numbers in the numerator and denominator, and 7.4 isn't a whole number. However, we know whenever we see a decimal that we can get rid of that decimal essentially by shifting it to the right by multiplying by powers of 10 or multiples of 10. So if we just need to shift a decimal one place to the right, we only need to multiply by one factor of 10. However, remember that if we multiply the numerator by a factor of 10, the denominator must also be multiplied by a factor of 10. So walking through what we've done, 7.4%, drop the percentage sign, write 7.4 over 100. Note that 7.4 isn't a whole number. You need to move the decimal 1 point, multiply by 10 in the top and the bottom. That's going to leave you with 74 over 1,000, which is the correct answer as a fraction, but it's not in simplest form. And the reason that you know it's not in simplest form is you recognize that numerator 74 and denominator 1,000 are both even. They end in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. And whenever we have a fraction where the numerator and denominator are even numbers, we know that we can cancel a factor of 2 from both. If you cancel that factor of 2 from the numerator and denominator, in the numerator, you're left with 37, and in the denominator, you're left with 500. And if you go and you try to factor 37, you will find out that it's prime. And since 37 doesn't go into 500, this is a fraction in lowest terms. So problem 27 is pretty simple, similar to that. Namely, you have a percentage with a decimal on it, 0.34%. Note that what you need to do there is the same thing. Drop the percentage, write the 0.34 over 100. The same idea as the last problem. This isn't the final answer because 0.34 isn't a whole number. We could make it a whole number if we simply multiplied by 100. And the reason we're going to pick 100 is we need to shift the decimal this time 2 places instead of 1. Whatever we do to the numerator of the fraction, multiplying by 100, we also must do to the denominator. Remember that when you multiply a whole number, like 100 times 100, you're just going to add 2 zeros to it. So that 100 is going to actually become 10,000. Note, there are the 2 original zeros. There are the 2 you added to it. So after you actually take 0.34 divided by 100 and get rid of the decimal, you make it 34 over 10,000. Same idea as above. 34 and 10,000 are both even numbers. So you begin by canceling a factor of 2. 2 cancels into 34. 17 is what you're left with. And you can cancel that factor of 2 into 10,000, and you're left with 5,000. And by the same idea as above, 17 is a prime number. And since 17 doesn't divide into 5,000, that fraction is in lowest terms because the numerator and denominator share no common factors.